Hey, welcome to worshiptutorials.com. This is a full lesson that is available as a free preview from the Worship Manual, Volume 2. So the Worship Manual is a series of online courses for worship leaders or for volunteers in leadership positions over praise and worship in churches. The Worship Manual Volume 2 is over 9 hours of content. Link below if you want to see more of that. In this lesson, we're in Module 2, which is all about transitions, which are very important for you as worship leaders in your church. This lesson talks about the different types of transitions that you might consider using to go between different songs, you know, from a song to a message, anything like that. Check it out.
All right, so now on to the really good stuff.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the 5 different types of transitions that you can implement in your worship set. And the first type is what I call a verbal transition.
Oh, yeah.
A verbal transition is literally the words that you're saying.
Yeah.
You know, it seems kind of like common sense, but so often we don't think about what we're going to say in between songs.
Yeah.
So we're just like, hey, this song is called Good, Good Father. It's about how God is a good father. Let's sing it together.
That's a...
On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate that transition?
I'd give you maybe a 2. Because you didn't like say you didn't.
I didn't use heresy
use profanity on accident.
That would be a 0.
Or
that's
like,
true.
We're gonna worship me now. You know, you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
say that.
Yeah,
You
that's
actually-
true.
You actually said something that made sense.
That's true. So we'll give it a 2.
But the point is, you can do way better.
Yeah, and a lot of times too, you might be transitioning from one thing to a different thing. You know, so you might be going from the offering to a worship song, and the verbal transition allows you to connect those two things. It's really awkward if you got a guy up here talking about your missions team and raising money for missions, and then you go into some random song that has nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
A lot of times you can maybe say a few words, maybe maybe your song is about talking about just God's goodness, and you could simply say, hey, isn't it awesome that we get to support our missionaries and just celebrate God's goodness with the people that we haven't met? And speaking of God's goodness, this song is just a reminder of
God.
That's a verbal transition, right?
Yeah.
Those are important because a lot of times you will have those opportunities to make verbal transitions. The cool thing about the verbal transition, it doesn't really involve anyone else.
Yeah.
So you don't have to worry about the band nailing it or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's the simplest, most basic transition, but I think it's also the most important transition for a worship leader, and the ability to read the room and kind of know where people are, because one word you say might be able to take you into that next place.
One thing to note about this particular video, we're just going to define a handful of different types of transitions. We are then in the next video is going to go into like how to actually execute them. So that stuff is coming. So if you need help with like what to say between songs, we all do. That's coming. And the next type of transition though that we're gonna address in this module are media-driven transitions. So like if you come out of a song and right into like a video, for example, or if you have some kind of an audio thing that plays underneath, we'll talk about all that stuff as well. But media-driven transitions can really have an air of polish about them that they're not hard to do.
No, you just got to find good
videos. If you have the
videos.
equipment and you have like, you know, great content,
sure,
they can be really easy to execute, and if done well, like they can really take things to the next level for you, and an air of professionalism about it that's really good.
Another type of transition, which is one of the more obvious ones, is a musically driven transition.
Right.
This would be a transition from one song to the next, or a song that uses the band to transition from one thing to the next thing. This is a transition that often takes a little bit more time to think through, and a little bit more involvement from your team as well. It also requires probably a little more practice to make sure that things are working properly. So there's this is something you see a lot in professional concerts.
Yeah.
You'll see people spend a lot of time on really cool. I know like when my friends go to concerts and stuff, a lot of times I'll hear things like, dude, you should have saw the way he went from that song to that song. It was so cool, you know. So those are often very memorable experiences as well, and it also keeps the musical thing going, because sometimes you don't want to talk or you don't want a video. You want to just keep the music moving forward. So that's kind of a very common type of transition.
Yeah, and just a point of clarification, when you talk about a musical transition, you're talking about the actual musicians
pulling it off, playing it.
Or the vocalist,
because you can have a musical transition that's media, like an audio file that you play.
Sure,
like
we'll talk about that,
bumper music, for example. But you're talking about the band doing it themselves.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different ways to do it, which we'll talk about in the next lesson. Another type of transition is what I call a moment-driven transition, meaning that something is going to happen. People are going to be doing something.
Okay.
Like offering, for example. People are gonna start receiving the tithes or giving the tithes and offering. Yeah. It might be a handshake. Yeah. Hey, we're gonna get everybody to shake hands. You know, that's a popular one in churches.
Greet each other.
It might be a response moment.
Turn to your neighbor.
Turn to your neighbor and shake hands. It might be a response moment where you're asking people to come to the altar.
Yeah.
So those are all transitional moments. Now, there can be multiple transitions happening at the same time.
Yeah.
But this is
probably have multimedia or audio.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
But those are the most common transitions that you would have in your arsenal or you would plan into a service where major things are happening or things are heading in a different direction. And so that's basically the one that will involve the most people,
right,
and require probably the most organization as well. But that's a very common one.
You can go outside the box on that too, especially if you're like at a night of worship or like you're hosting a conference or something. Like you can do a game with people.
Yeah.
You can have a camera that goes out throughout the audience and asks questions and stuff. So you can get kind of outside the box. Yeah. I think another thing to think about when you're talking about types of transition or just transitions in general is they can be really, really short in length or they can be a lot longer, depending on what you're doing. But even if it's a couple seconds, like often going between a song to the next, you're not going to spend more than a few seconds doing it. But it still requires a high level of intentionality and excellence as far as to make it smooth.
Yes.
So like you can be talking about a short period of time or maybe even 60 seconds, which doesn't sound like that long, but trust me, 60 seconds can be an eternity out there. Yeah. Especially if it's your 60 seconds allotted to you and you're supposed to say something and you haven't prepared.
That's right.
So in the next video, we're going to talk about, it's going to be a little bit more of an in-depth one and maybe a little longer video about how to implement each type of transition that we've talked about in this one. We'll see you there.